My career in innovation started right out of school. I went to work at Wells Fargo. Wells Fargo at that time was developing the first passive types of investing, which you can think of as index funds. And it was amazing to me because I'd just come from the University of Chicago, was steeped in all this data and wound up tighter than a drum. And you show people the data. I mean, that's what changed in the world was we had data that we didn't have before, let's say the early 60s. But now you could test things out like are professional money managers worth the cost, those kinds of things. I'll leave you to you can decide that for yourself. Congratulations to the fellow honorees. It's great to be recognized here with you. And thanks to all my friends and family and fellow co-workers, for showing up. It really means a lot to me. And then, of course, special thanks to the Museum of American Finance for giving me this award. The mission, as outlined earlier, it really is incredibly important. The idea of financial literacy and the history of finance, can really improve people's lives. And in particular, what I'd like to talk tonight is one aspect of it, which is the public finance markets, public markets. I grew up in Kansas, as the senator mentioned, with Depression-era parents. And they didn't trust markets, so they never really ever invested. And they view themselves as outsiders, and they felt that insiders are the ones that made all the money and would take advantage of them, so they never invested. And that's unfortunate, because if they'd understood better about stock and bond markets, they could have invested and lived a little easier in retirement. Here's what they were missing. Public stock and bond markets perform pretty much like we hoped they would. Stocks have higher average returns than bonds, and bonds have higher average returns than inflation, and so on. And this gives us trust in the power of public markets. And best of all, you don't have to be an insider to get those returns. These days, everyone can get stock and bond market returns through low-cost market portfolios like index funds, which can be purchased very easily. In essence, then, markets work, giving fair returns for risk taken. Of course, this applies to the total stock and bond markets and not to individual stocks and individual bonds. If people better understood how markets work, they would be more likely to invest and stay invested. Unfortunately, my parents only had a few years in retirement. And as they passed away in 1985, my brother and sister and I went to the bank and opened their safety deposit box. Of course, it's surprising we could even find the key to the safety deposit box at all. But what we found in there was really amazing. $15,000 in cash. That represented a huge fraction of their total value of their estate. And it makes you sad that they worked so hard for that money and then just left it in the safety deposit box. They needed Byron to help them out. So it's unfortunate they never had a program of investing in public markets. If they had invested $15,000 when my dad got back from World War II in 1945 and got the stock market return, by 1985, 40 years later, it would have been worth more than $1 million. That's the magic of compounding at over 11% a year. Now, it's been my experience that the benefits of compounding are not well understood by many. I mean, those of us in the business, it's kind of automatic. But particularly in today's environment where you have so much day trading and betting on various markets, it's people lose sight of the benefits of compounding. And hopefully, this is one of the goals of the museum. They'll be able to change all of that. Compounding, said Einstein, is the eighth wonder of the world, and it really is. And if you think that 40-year period that we're talking about is unique, think again. It would take in that $15,000 that was in the safety deposit box, invested for the next 40 years, through 2025, it would have, and got the stock market returns, it would have gotten going to $1 million again. I mean, it's so here you have back-to-back 40-year periods, and then if you extend the data going back to 1926, what you can do now, you have 100 years of good returns that you can that we can research, and in accordance with going back 100 years, you now pick up the depression years, and still the compound return overall was is greater than 10% a year. Government bond returns over the same time are about 4.5% a year. So those portrays a sensible story about risk and return. So compounding truly is the way to make a lot of money, but you have to stay invested if you're going to be assured of the long-term returns that we're talking about. And what happens in the future, who knows? The last 100 years, though, I think seems like a good test of how markets work. If stocks can compound at 10% through the Great Depression and all our wars, through periods of low inflation and high inflation, I think people can be optimistic about the future and be hopeful about the power of stock and bond markets. People don't invest unless they think they can expect a fair return, and it's that dynamic that leads to the returns we observe and the hope for the future. You thought you'd be getting away without me talking about data, but it's data that made all the difference. Our financial, our public markets work well. Investors get fair returns when they put up capital, and companies can issue stocks and bonds at fair costs of capital. My career in innovation started right out of school. I went to work at Wells Fargo. Wells Fargo at that time was developing the first, passive types of investing, which you can think of as index funds. And it was amazing to me because I'd just come from the University of Chicago, was steeped in all this data and wound up tighter than a drum. And you show people the data. I mean, that's what changed in the world was we had data that we didn't have before, let's say the early 60s. But now you could test things out, like are professional money managers worth the cost, those kinds of things. I'll leave you to you can decide that for yourself. But one of the things that struck me about innovation was you talk to people, look, here's what we think is a very sensible way to invest some money here. You buy the stock market. Instead of individual stock, the whole overall market does pretty well. And one of the strangest things, sources of feedback that I got several times was when you talk to people and you say, we're creating this thing called an index fund. I don't know who came up with the term index fund, but it's all of a sudden, poof, it was there. And say, let's think about an index fund. They go, geez, that's un-American. I go, what's un-American about improving the way you invest? In all the years, I still think that's about the most difficult thing to overcome, that objection, because it's, I think, so silly, I guess. Well, as we went on, in 1981, we founded Dimensional, and I have to point out, we founded it here in Brooklyn, And I got a million stories about innovating, but in this one, it was a New York Telephone. It really wasn't. That was the telephone company at the time. They really weren't ready for a startup business. So when I called up to get 6 telephone lines, they wouldn't give them to me. They thought I was a bookie. So eventually, I worked my way. I got all the way up to the treasurer of New York Tel, and he sent some people down to install lines. So when the installers came down, they looked, and the whole block in Brooklyn Heights that I was living in, they only had 8 lines available, but they gave me 6. And with those 6 lines and my converted spare bedroom, now all of a sudden we had a trading floor, and that's how we got started. So thank you, Brooklyn. As was mentioned, we pioneered in what became known as factor investing, and I don't want to get into that tonight, but it's just a different way of saying, look, just because you don't think conventional active management is going to add value doesn't mean you need to index. There's another way to think about things, and that's what we've been able to build our firm around. And we're able to build our firm because of this emphasis on academic research and education. In fact, when we started Dimensional, we exclusively used academics as our outside directors for our firm and for the mutual funds that we've created. When people hear that, they thought, well, that was pretty clever. Actually, it wasn't very clever. What it was those are the only people I knew. I'd been in the PhD program at Chicago, and my mentor is Eugene Fama, and so I said, one of my first calls was to Gene when I set up the firm, and said, would you like to join to be a founder and kind of really keep us up to date on research? And he said, sure. Well, he's Italian. He goes, sure. Anyway, and then when we're meeting there, a lawyer we had for the funds said, you have to have an independent board of directors for your mutual funds. No kidding. So we were on campus, so we just walked from Fama's office over to the faculty building and walked in. First person we talked to was Merton Miller. Merton, we need an independent director. Oh, sure. And then walked down the hall. Coming in the other way was Myron Scholes, and go, Myron, need a director, and well, how much are we going to get paid? I mean, you Goldman guys, is that pretty good, Myron? That's pretty good, Myron. Yeah. I said, well, Myron, hey, look, it'd be unseemly. We're talking about you being an independent director. It'd be unseemly if we paid you anything. Besides, we don't have any money. But if we get the funds up and going, you'll have director's fees. And so that's kind of how we started on that path. But it was incredibly important to us and valuable. These guys let us their name and joined because they believe in what we're doing, and they didn't know if they'd ever get paid anything, and they still joined us. And over time, they did. You don't have to feel sorry for them. It did work out for them. So, and then actually, I can't. All 3 of those guys, Myron, Merton Miller, and Gene, all became Nobel laureates. And then we had 2 other future Nobel laureates, Bob Merton and Doug Diamond, joined the mutual fund board later on. So we've been working closely with 5 over the years. And part of the story is I've gotten to go to the Nobel ceremony twice. And if you ever have the opportunity, take advantage of it. What it is, the ceremony is like a week-long set of activities. They run these guys ragged, and they only have like 14 tickets they can use to invite friends. So it's really quite something. So as the senator mentioned, I'm coming out with a book in the fall. So please buy it. It's going to be really good. And buy 2, one for you and one for a friend. And the title of the book is Stay Calm, which really says everything about what I really believe, which is, and ties in with the mission of the museum. If people better understood how markets work and learned to appreciate the power of markets, they would be more likely to invest at all. They'd be more likely to stay calm, particularly this week, and let markets work for them. Today we are inundated with incalculable amounts of data, and most of it's just noise, so trust public markets, tune out the noise, and come up with a sensible investment solution and that you can stay with. That's after studying things, 100 years of data and all that. That's basically the conclusion. So I want to thank the museum again for giving me this Innovator Award. I applaud your mission, and thank you for a wonderful evening. So stay calm and stay invested and let markets work for you.